I want to talk a little bit next about the second R, which is resonance. And resonance is like a fancy way for us to say feeling your feelings, which sounds really silly. I mean, everyone feels like they feel a million feelings a day, but we're talking here not about just, oh, I got a paper cut, ow. We're talking about our deep feelings, our hard truths, sometimes things that you have sublimated or that you have disassociated from. And we all do it. We all have disassociative behaviors that we do, everything from social media. I mean, how many times do we check our phone? Everything can be dissociative, not just the really terrible things like drug use and alcoholism, but overgiving can be dissociative behavior where you don't really face your feelings. Taking care of your kids versus taking care of yourself can sometimes be disassociative because it's easier to just take care of other people than it is to take care of yourself. So this is really about using that resourcing to do your emotional planks, to create a window of tolerance so that you can start feeling your feelings and feel where your truths are. And oftentimes when people get to the point where they have some window of tolerance where they can hold their feelings and they can examine their personal truths and they can think about what it is that they're really feeling and undergoing, it's the place from which you can start to create permissioning and agency in order to make changes to yourself, to your relationships, to your interaction with other people. Sometimes when you examine your personal truths, you realize, or when you examine your feelings, you realize that you're part of the problem or that you need to change some of the ways that you're engaging with others. So getting to a safe place and creating a safe place to feel your feelings is a really important step. One of the things I want to talk about is boundaries, because in order to feel your feelings, you got to create some elbow room around the people and things in your life sometimes that are preventing you from feeling your feelings. What does that mean? Boundaries are also one of my favorite things to talk about because they've been my most challenged aspect of my personal life. I'm a caregiver. I'm someone who overgives. In fact, I've joked that I need to join Overgivers Anonymous because I overgive to everyone. And I have check-ins regularly with my sponsor, Vanessa, where I'm like, am I overgiving on this one? Or should I pull back? Do I need to dial it back? Because I'm a caregiver. I love people and I love to take care of people. So that's places in my own personal life where I've had to create really hard boundaries. And I equate them to like the VIP rope with the bouncer. Only certain people and certain things get past this VIP rope. And the VIP is you. The VIP is the access to your limited bag of emotional resources and what people and things are you going to give that limited bag of emotional resources to. And creating those boundaries is a big part of how we create room and safety to feel our feelings and to examine our truths. So Vanessa, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
This one was really challenging for me. And I reached a point earlier in my life where I realized it doesn't matter how I understand what happened, whether it's my childhood or my young adulthood, I am not going to be able to step into the self and the life that I want unless I can tolerate my feelings. And so I think that why feeling your feelings is so critical is because your truth and your healing sits behind them. And being able to walk through them and tolerate them not only allows you to be much more skillful in terms of asking and requesting for what you need from others, but also just more skillful in your own personal choices because you're in connection with your feelings. And, there's a whole host of reasons why we may not have access. Either we were not permissioned as children, we work in careers or environments which actively discourage any emotionality, and that can definitely be the case for women and for some men. And there's a whole host of reasons. Our society is fairly fast paced.
Well, and I think a lot of men have been told from the time they were little boys, don't cry, or real men don't feel their feelings, or real men don't talk about their feelings. And the reverse, like women are told, take care of everyone and be kind to everyone and be nice to everyone and love everyone. We've been kind of scripted from the time that we're really young in terms of how we are supposed to feel versus allowing us to just feel what we feel.
For me, the journey what has really helped me get there are mindfulness practices. One, because it became a lens through which I could actually access my feeling. But two, it also became a practice by which I could accept them kindly with compassion and be able to actually tolerate them as well.
I experience a lot in my professional life as well as my personal life, but a lot in my professional life where I'm talking to clients or I'm talking to colleagues, and people can sometimes become very unregulated around spaces that are touching or things that are touching deep emotional issues that they haven't ventilated our feelings. You have to give a lot of air and ventilate the feelings so that you can go into these moments and not be on the ceiling, not be so unregulated that you're in a meeting and someone says something and you're flying off the handle, or you're in a moment where you're dealing with something and you don't behave in a way that feels in line with kind of your personal ethos or your personal ethic, like where you almost say like, that wasn't me. I didn't act that way. I can't believe I acted that way. I think that having a place where you can feel your feelings that's safe, it's almost like a decompression chamber where you're like releasing the power of that emotion so that when you go into the situations that are activating, that you can come to it as like a capital A adult, like a regulated adult, versus coming into those situations where you're like the Tasmanian devil, where you're like all over the place and you're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and you're just, running around the room and you're ballooning around the room and your feelings are just all over the place versus being regulated. And I think that having a safe place to feel your feelings, oftentimes with my clients, if they're in a therapeutic setting outside of our relationship where they're really ventilating these things and allowing the feelings to be touched and validated and healed in a way, they can come to our meetings or our decision making sessions or our court appearances or various things, mediations that we're doing. They can come to it where they can talk about hard things. And it's not that they're not upset or that they don't have hurt feelings, but they're very regulated around the hard things versus being very unregulated.
The other piece of feeling your feelings is taking responsibility. That would probably be another R, is really taking responsibility and not asking others to hold. So that what you were describing is when people act out in a variety of different ways, what that really is often is just fear. And people are afraid to feel what they're feeling. And so they ask others to hold it in the form of anger or abuse or withdrawal or all of the behaviors that we do that can be hurtful and harmful to connection and to you being able to have your needs met. So there is this maturation process that happens. And I would also say, in addition to the decompression chamber, it's also a reclamation process. The amount of energy we spend avoiding feeling our feelings is phenomenal and can really be a huge drain. And when we begin to feel our feelings, even though at first it may feel more draining or difficult or sad, actually what you're doing is you're reclaiming all that energy because you don't need to avoid it anymore.
Well, and I love, like, you and I have had so many conversations where we have, through the course of our own long-term marriages, have just really learned that instead of creating conflict or having a fight over something that you really don't really want to have a fight over, if you can get to a point where you just say, where you feel your feelings, you're like, this is what I need in the situation. This is what I need for myself. This is what I need from the other person. And you go to the other person and you just say, hey, what you did hurt me in this way. And this is what I need from you. Or this is what would feel like connection or repair. Or this is what would help me move on from this. You can diffuse a conflict and diffuse situations so quickly. When you get to a point where you know what you're feeling, you identify your feelings, you're responsible for your feelings, and you're not making the other person hold it. I mean, we all do the passive aggressive, latent aggressive, shitty comments to our spouse, shitty comments to other people, comments under our breath, criticisms, backward criticisms. But really, if you're in touch with your feelings and in touch with what you need in a situation, you can avoid a lot of that. You can have a much healthier engagement with your spouse. I think also the reverse of that is I see a lot of people who come to me who are dealing with, and right now I feel like the question that I always get asked is, do you have experience dealing with narcissists? I laugh because almost every high conflict divorce case I have, one or both parties has some kind of narcissism or emotional dysregulation, or sometimes even more seriously, some form of significant pathology. And one of the best ways to deal with those high conflict personalities and those high conflict people is to not meet activation with activation, to not bring your overly emotional state with that person. The narcissist feed on that. It feeds their narcissistic supply. The more upset you get, the more dysregulated you get, the more the narcissist enjoys it. And the more you're feeding the fire versus putting the fire out. So one of the things that we talk about, and it's a book that I recommend, but the acronym is BIFF, which is when you deal with a narcissist, you are brief, informative, friendly, firm, and you limit how much emotion you bring into the space with this other person. And I think that that requires to get to a point, and I've had clients who are amazing, who've done amazing emotional work where they have realized their abuse, they have felt their feelings, they have spent time validating the feelings that the abuser has made them feel, and they don't need to engage with the abuser in the same way because they know what's happening. They know what's being touched, and they understand and they know the dance with the abuser, and so they've learned to disengage from the dance. Whether you're in a super abusive relationship or you're married and you just have normal married conflict, we all benefit from being responsible for our own feelings and dealing with our own feelings. And it's really the only thing we have any control over. We have no control over anyone else's feelings, anyone else's reactions. We only have control over our feelings and how we manage them.
I think it also allows you to be able to really ensure you're meeting the right need, because often if a feeling is challenging to feel, it is much easier to be upset about the surface. This presents a lot in conflict with our partners. You may be fighting about the request that you made, whatever it is, clean the counters, pick the dirty laundry up off the bathroom floor. But is it really about that? Is it more, I don't feel heard and respected, or I have really deep needs of order that came from a very chaotic childhood. And so when they're not met in our home, it feels like my childhood is creeping in and it makes me feel afraid and I resent you for it. And of course, you have to be thoughtful, and to be that vulnerable, you need to ensure you're being that vulnerable with someone who's going to receive you safely. One of the ways that I have found really helpful, and there are many ways, and it's really important that you explore a variety of different ways and find what works for you. Where is your door to your inner emotional life? For some people, they walk through that door through the woods, through yoga, through a therapeutic relationship, through a variety of different ways. In meditation, there are many different ways as well. One practice that I have found just beautifully helpful, particularly when you're activated, because what use are these practices if you have to be calm to begin with? This is a way to just at least what I call get the topographical read on the terrain of your emotional landscape. So you're really just trying to assess what's there, as if you were standing on top of a hill and looking out and trying to say, I see a field, I see a meadow, I see a stream, I see a mountain, I see wildlife. You're really just trying to see. And the practice is called RAIN, and RAIN is an acronym. And it was coined by a Vipassana meditation teacher by the name of Michelle McDonald. It has been made famous by another meditation teacher named Tara Brach, with whom I've studied. And the acronym stands for recognize, R is recognize, A is accept or allow, I is investigate, and N is nurture. I'll give an example of what that might look like if I've had something very upsetting happen. And, I'm up here, if this is 10, I'm up here. So, and I'll say just recognize. And recognize can just be a naming process. I like to think of it as like emotional tantruming and foot stamping, like angry, you're naming everything that's in this space, but you're recognizing it as if you're saying, I see you. I see you. So you're just saying, I'm angry. I'm afraid. I'm sad. And usually as you continue that arc, you'll start to get closer and closer to what the real vulnerable feeling is. And so as you're naming all of these different emotions and feelings that are in this space, you don't need to fix them, and they don't even need any action on your part. You're just trying to understand what's here. And when you feel ready, and that process can take, anywhere from a minute, sometimes it takes 20 minutes, as long as you need. And then you sort of seamlessly move into the allow or accept. And this can be a tricky one, particularly for women, and particularly if you've been in a situation where you feel you've been accepting things that have been detrimental to you and not helpful. And what I like to say is, you're not accepting or allowing it as a form of permission. It's a form of recognition so that you can care for it. And part of care for it might be moving it out of your life. Part of caring for it may look something else, but you have to at first let it be in the room so that you can understand it and then make a skillful choice around it. So it is not saying you get to stay here for all time, or that I agree with you, or that I accept you, but it is saying I allow this to be here for the purpose of my understanding and my caring. And that can feel hard. I usually kind of do it like this when I'm doing it, and it doesn't have to feel comfortable. And then moving to investigate, you can use many different inquiry questions. I tend to find the question of, how old does this feel?
I love that question. So can we just stay here on this one for a minute? I feel like this one is just so, to use the R, it's so resonant for me, but I feel like it's going to be resonant for a lot of people. I think sometimes our emotional responses to things can be so disproportionate to what's actually happening, where we call it like you're at a 10, but really what's happening in the room is a 2. And you kind of wonder why am I at a 10, but what happened in the room is really a 2. And sometimes this conversation that you and I have around this process and around this investigate part of it is really about whether or not it's touching something that's older. This could be a childhood trauma. It could be a trauma that you suffered as a young adult. It could be a trauma that's an ongoing trauma. It could be a personal shame that you hold that is touching for a lot of people. There could be sexual abuse. There could be emotional and physical abuse that happened. You could have been the victim of some form of sexual violence. There can be a lot of different things that a small incident can touch an old pain. And you realize that the reason why you're at a 10 is because it's just touching something bigger, maybe that you haven't really healed, or may not ever really go away or ever really heal, but it might just be something that if you ventilated it better, you can put down your activation around it, and you can recognize that your response is kind of disproportionate to what's happening in the room.
I would also say, in addition to being old, it's also important to ask, where am I feeling this in my body? Just investigate, where does this feeling live? Is it in my belly? Is it in my chest or my throat? Do I not feel it at all in my body? Do I not feel anything in my
And
body?
can you explain like what that means? Like what are some of the feelings? Because you've asked me and you've prompted me sometimes when I've been upset about something, you'll ask me, where do you feel it in your body?
Some of the ways that I have felt and that others have described is it can be a physical feeling of tightness. So, for example, if I'm anxious about something, all of my anxiety is in my stomach. I feel like I have swallowed like a heavy rock that is just taking all the space and it's just heavy. Or it can feel like a constriction in your chest. It can also sometimes, if you have anxiety, they can feel like a tremendous amount of energy, like a prickling. Sometimes when people get angry or scared, your skin tone can just go cold. You can get a rapid temperature change on your skin, or you can start emitting sweat on your hand, under your armpit, down your back. All of those physiological clues about what's happening. Sometimes it can be a taste in the mouth. It can be the rate at which you are breathing or unable to breathe. That is a huge one. That's why breath practice is so important, because it's the first signal to tell you about where you are in the activation scale is about how you can access your breath. And then sometimes there's real resonance. The location of the feeling in your body can be because that's literally where the trauma happened that maybe you haven't fully acknowledged. But it can also be symbolic. Like sometimes when you're not expressing your truth and you say, I feel it in my throat, I feel like I just have this lump and I can't breathe. But other times it's really so that you can locate the physical sensation of your experience. And eventually, the closer we become of knowing our physical body and its connection to our emotional body, because they're inextricably linked, we can use our body to answer questions. So I can know that something is a no, and someone may say, oh, why? Are you busy? Are you scheduled and you're not available? And I'll say, no, I just have a metal taste in my mouth. And anytime I get a metal taste in my mouth, it's a no. Like my body is intelligent enough to know that. So that's the other reason why that investigative process can be so useful, because it's helping you understand where various feelings live in your body. The last form of inquiry, and the inquiry can devise your own questions as well that help you understand, what do I need to know about this feeling? Sometimes questions can be like, what wants to be seen? What most wants to be felt? For some people, that may feel too soft and vulnerable. And
Mhm.
so pick an inquiry question that feels suited to where you are. The last thing that I always ask is, what is the context in which this feeling is happening? Because in your earlier example, you may say, I don't know why I'm at a 10 over this person's action, when the action itself is probably a 2. But if you stop and say, what is the context that this is happening? I experience this person as consistently undermining me, and that every little comment becomes part of a larger pattern of what I experience as abuse. And oftentimes we miss the pattern because patterns can be really challenging to look at, because they usually are going to require some form of change from us. So it's easier to isolate the incidents and say, oh, I'm just overreacting. Are you? Are you? Or is it that you have a consistent pattern? Now, sometimes the patterning is actually something we create. It's a story we tell ourselves. And that's actually not what's happening. The person has a completely different experience that's separate from you. It is not the pattern and the story you're telling yourself, but only you know that. And so I will often also ask myself, what is the larger context in which I'm feeling this? Is there one?
I love this idea that you just kind of explained about the difference between what is true and real and what's really happening in the space and what is your reaction to it. Because I think that you are right that there is that difference between if you have a context or a pattern with someone or some situation, it doesn't have to necessarily be a person that is unhealthy or destructive, where you're your 10 is actually appropriate because your 10 is the warning sign that there's something wrong in your space. It's the red light flashing that's telling you, wah, wah, get out. The house is on fire and you need to get out, versus it's just you reacting inappropriately or reacting too strongly to something that maybe isn't unsafe or isn't unhealthy. So I think that that's a really good distinction that you made in terms of this investigative piece of this is about accessing your intuition and accessing your truth in terms of how things feel for you and why they feel that way.
You can move back and forth between recognize, allow, and investigate. And then eventually you come to the end of nurture. And nurture can be challenging for some of us because speaking kindly to ourselves, being loving and accepting can feel for some really challenging, particularly if you have shame or guilt around the feelings that you're exploring with this practice. And so I like to offer that sometimes if the nurture piece where you're caring for what's in this space is challenging, you can picture someone that you love and what would they say to you? But the idea is that you're exploring, how does this want to be cared for? And how can I care for this? And there's an element of personal responsibility there. Yes, you may also get clarity that you'd like to make requests of people that you love to help meet your needs, but they are exactly that, the request. And just like you have the right to say no to requests from others, they also have the right. They may not be resourced or have the ability.
I love that there's that Mark Nebo quote that I love, which is when you become a more whole and wholehearted version of yourself, you are able to ask for things and you're also able to accept when people can't give it to you. So it's the combination of learning to ask for what you want, but also learning to accept that you may not get exactly what you want from another person. It's kind of holding the duality of that you need to be this kind of fully fledged capital A regulated adult. You need to be responsible for your feelings and ask for what you need. And then you have to also be whole enough to hear from another person or hear from a situation that maybe your needs are not going to be met.
That nurturing can look like something as simple as, it's okay. I hear you, sweetheart. I'm sorry. Anything that feels authentic to you. For some people, that's super off putting. It can be triggering, even for some. But finding a voice in which you would want to be soothed that feels soothing for you and feels like it nurtures and cares for what's in this space.
Do you think that people who have been very badly invalidated find this piece the hardest? Because if you have had your emotional life and your feelings invalidated through either your childhood abuse, your current relationship, your current spouse, your current partner, I think that this piece is a really hard piece.
I think any practice that puts you in touch with your emotions and asks you to care for and accept them when others have made it clear that your emotions will be the basis of their rejecting you or harming you, it can feel really threatening to embrace them. And while we don't have time today to go into another practice, that's why the practice of mindful self compassion can be really valuable because it helps you develop a sense of self compassion, which really allows you to then take much more responsibility for your feelings because you're not worried about this sort of self excoriating talk that we give ourselves where we punish ourselves for being certain ways or feeling certain ways. And so this process, we obviously really drew it out, but you can do it in 3 minutes or less to be able to just ground yourself and say, what am I feeling right now? And how does that need to be seen and cared for? And what, if any, requests can I make of myself to be able to do that and others? What's really important to hold, though, as you're doing this investigation of your feelings is the concept of titration. I like to think of it as a little bit at a time, a little bit, and a going back and forth back and forth. And we talked about the window of tolerance, and it's when you notice you come either out of that window of tolerance, either you're out at the top, so you're upregulated, you're overregulated, or you're out at the bottom, meaning you're underregulated. So you become dissociated or you become lethargic and disconnected. One of the ways that we avoid that is by the use of titration. And especially when you first start meditating, that's why touching into joy and then doing that also in your body, noticing in your body where it feels safe and good and calm, and then where it maybe doesn't. And having the emotional flexibility to go in and step back, go in and step back, having the skillfulness to know that we don't stay in places either without resourcing or without the support we need for too long that are too difficult. And that support might look like pausing the meditation, grounding yourself, touching your animal companion, looking out the window to something beautiful, touching another part of your body that feels safe, but allowing yourself to come back into the window of tolerance before you begin that exploration again. And that process of titrating or moving back and forth between that which might feel challenging and that which feels comforting and safe. That's so skillful. I like to think of it as a touchstone that you can go out and explore, but then you have this central place you come back to for safety, like your home base.
I wanted to ask about and talk about a little bit, because we're kind of talking about the meditation and mindfulness in the context of relationship conflict and maintaining a long-term relationship, and also in the context of people who are undergoing either some kind of family law or family conflict or divorce. And oftentimes they'll be asked to be in a very difficult situation where their emotions and hard feelings and pain are going to be touched. And we know when that's going to happen. It's not as if it's just, normal everyday life. There'll be an event that's a planned event, a calendared event that's going to happen. It could be a court appearance. It could be a mediation. It could be a trial. I have clients sometimes who are deposed, who are very nervous about being deposed, and they're going to be asked questions that are going to be really hard to deal with, or they're going to be questions that are going to be very painful. And sometimes they're also at some of these meetings are the first meeting where they're in the room with the person that they're separated from or getting divorced from or having conflict with. So I want to talk a little bit about how you recommend kind of preparing for that, and what are some steps to kind of get ready to engage on that level with your pain, with your conflict, with trauma, with things that are hard. Because I feel like these steps, not only are they steps that you need to do when you're calm and you're at home and you're not having anything ongoing, but they're also steps that you need to be able to access and be available to you when you're about to step into the arena, basically, with your pain or with this other person. So I would love to hear from you in terms of how you see the interplay of the resourcing and the titration of the feelings as a way to meet those moments.
Two things come to mind. One is a sense of deep grounding through breath in the body. And second is a real felt sense of the impermanence of feelings. And the more that we sit with our bodily sensations and our feelings through meditation, the more that we see that they're impermanent. They're always changing.
So, what would be a starting place? I know we joke sometimes because you've done so much training that oftentimes when you're in the training, the first thing people say is, I'm not good at it. I can't breathe. I can't slow my mind down. My thoughts are racing. I'm feeling all these feelings. It's like mine's broken. I can't do it. What's the first step? So, let's say you've never done any breathing exercises. You've never meditated. You've never sat on a yoga mat. You're about to kind of face this situation and circumstances in your life. What's the first piece?
In addition to obviously ensuring the resourcing, both emotional, ensuring that your body is resourced, is really starting with a breath. And I say that with a small caveat. For some, the breath is actually very triggering and they're not able to go into the breath right away. And so then they start with another sense, whether it's sound or sight or touch. It can be some other focus, but let's presume that you can access your breath and that the breath is safe and not triggering for you. And why the breath matters is because that is the one way that you can lane switch your body from fight, flight, which is going to happen in a upsetting and activated situation. And what happens to you neurophysiologically is that you are literally going into your amygdala. You lose prefrontal cortex functioning, meaning the front of your brain. Your vision literally narrows, your digestion changes. All of these physiological changes happen to you in moments of stress. And that's appropriate for some situations.
Which is a terrible place to be in if you're in a situation where you have to make decisions. I mean, a lot of times my clients, when we're in these moments, that's the moment where I'm turning to them and saying, hey, what do you want to do? How do you want to settle this? How do you want to resolve this? Do you like the settlement that's being proposed? Do you like what's being said? Do you want to continue to pursue litigation? Do you want to resolve your case? And this is the moment where their brain is going offline, where you're so activated, you're so upset that it's hard in that moment to make decisions. Or even sometimes I have moments where I don't think that the person's actually even hearing anything that I'm saying, because they're just in that panicked space, that panicked fight, flight, or freeze space.
When you're in the state that you were talking about, the way you move out of that and lane switch, move your body over to the right lane, which is your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest or tend to befriend, but it's the part of your nervous system that is going to be allow you full access to your prefrontal cortex thinking. You're going to be much more, you're open to human connection, you're open to all of your senses are available to you. The best and fastest way to do that for most people is through breath. And we can tell our bodies that it is safe, even in situations that don't feel safe. And so there are many ways to do it, but really it is as simple as breathing in. When someone says, take 3 deep breaths, there's a reason that that works. And if possible, exhaling longer on the exhale, essentially bringing your vagus nerve online so that you can actually calm yourself. So the first step is really starting with, if you're in that situation, in addition to just breathing, and everybody has different ways of doing it. Some people really like a 3-count breath where you're breathing in for 2, hold for 2, out for 4, or some cadence of that works for you, depending on your lung capacity. And others just like simply breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. Some people have to breathe in through the mouth and out, and really just allowing yourself to take those breaths, because eventually you will feel yourself begin to calm down. I also find grounding really helps. So when you're taking those breaths, allowing yourself to have your feet on the ground. And why that matters is because often when you are activated and afraid, you are actually not in the present. You are in either the future or the past. And when we do things that physically connect us to the present moment, like press our feet on the ground, look around the room, name the wall color, name the light, you're literally orienting yourself. And doing that with breath can really help you then shift out of that activated place into a more calm place. If you know you're going to do something stressful, just like you don't show up for a marathon without having practice, this is the same. You'll want to, as much as you can, be able to practice this breath work and practice accessing your emotions, because the more that you do it, you'll see that emotions are fleeting, that this is not permanent. When we are in activated situations, it's so easy to think, this is who I am, and it'll always be this way. Right. And the more that you develop a felt sense, then you can sit in that room with the spouse that's activating you. Right. You can keep your breathing clear and connected, and you can know it will not always be like this. This is hard right now. I can hold this, and it won't be hard in 2 hours or when this is over. And sometimes we don't know when things are going to be over.
In my dealings with a lot of my clients, that we will sometimes build in, if we know something's going to be really activating, I will say, we're not making a decision today. We're not going to decide anything today. Today, we're just going to get information. We're going to listen. We're going to hear the options. And then we're going to have a 48 to 72 hour period of down regulation where we're going to resource ourselves again, and we're going to take a break from this, and we're going to go fill the tank, and then we're going to come back and we're going to look at it. And so we'll oftentimes do these events, and then I won't plan a meeting for several days, and then we'll have the meeting after you've had an opportunity to down regulate a little bit and get the activation down and bring yourself back online and fill the tank a little bit, so that you can start making decisions from a much more informed place where you really have access to everything, your intuition, your higher thinking, all of that.